There's a great divide in the world today, and I see this divide only getting stronger and stronger over the next decade or two. And that is between those who follow the God man and those who follow the man God. The God man is Jesus Christ, and the man God is ourselves, and we believe ourselves to be capable of becoming some kind of God. And the Bible very much applies to the modern world today, but one story in the Bible, a very small story, it's only about 9 verses, that really stands out to me is the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel, man is supposed to spread out amongst the world and follow God's order to be fruitful and multiply and to subdue the planet. And man is supposed to take lordship over the planet, and that's what he's been commanded to do. But instead, man decides that they will build a great city and a great tower in that city, and the tower may rise up to heaven. And man, builds this great city, and God has to come down and divide the languages. And I really don't think, of course, we're not living in the actual literal Tower of Babel today, but we're very much living in the spirit of Babel. And in the civilization we live in today, the Western world, it's quite clear. In the past, the Western man took the Tower of Babel story so seriously that the tallest building in town was the church, and nothing could be taller than a church. The biggest church in town, nothing could be taller than it. But in the world we live in today, all the tallest buildings in town are always things that worship man, particularly in his pursuit of power and greed. And you increasingly see this divide in the world today, and you increasingly see it that people are convinced that we can become God. As people increasingly no longer believe in a heaven, they're convinced that we have to create a heaven in this life. And people are really becoming more and more. So many people are just obsessed really with achieving godhood. You look all around with all these new technologies. For instance, a lot of people are talking about trying to essentially make cybernetic humans, mixing man with machine, or tweaking with man's DNA, editing man to become the perfect race. And this is the next step in this whole movement towards godhood, the very altering of our bodies with machines and genetic engineering. And we really are increasingly see this as people who are willing to go fully into this whole, we're going to become a god and we're going to create a heaven on this earth, and those who are not. And I've really noticed since this decade, I really think that this decade, the 20s, is really, I think, really this, truly we see this great divide happening between those that are not going to go along with the whole man is going to become the perfect God, um, and those who are going to follow a natural order of the things. And I truly do believe very strongly in a natural order, that God has made the world with a natural order. There is a hierarchy to creation, and there's a purpose to creation. Everything in creation has a purpose, and that um, man is supposed to tend to creation and to love God, love our neighbor. And a part of loving God is following the commandment to be fruitful and multiply and spread out among the world and to take care of the world. And man has really kind of is perverted this in some sense. And really, we're becoming increasingly convinced that we're a god. I mean, I really do think that perhaps an appropriate age, a name for our age in history is the humanist age, because with all the technological advancement we've seen over the last 200, 300 years, people are so convinced that we can really do anything. And people are just starting to do all kinds of abominations and things because there is no respect for a natural order. Man is convinced that he is above the natural order. And there's there's a natural order to the world. What I mean is that there's a natural law, and man cannot violate the natural law. Everything in creation has specific purposes, and when we abuse creation and when we break the natural law, we're doing something greatly horrible and greatly harming to ourselves. And the more time I spend in the wilderness, the pastures, the countryside, the woods, the more I increasingly see there is a natural order to the world. You just look all around. And I was in the Appalachian Mountains a while back, and I've said before, I absolutely love the Appalachian Mountains. I had this very profound revelation. It's very simplistic, but very profound. I realized that in the cities, everything glorifies man. And I'm not here to dunk on you if you live in the city. It isn't so much a problem with cities. It's just more of a problem with the character of the society we live in today. In the cities, everything glorifies man. The tallest things around are all these big buildings glorifying man in his pursuit of greed, and everything there is of this, it's of this artificial world. It is a world that says that man created a new human order, and a lot of people today believe in subjective morality, and the belief that we can just kind of create our own morality. And really, I think this belief that there is no objective truth is this ultimate embracing of man has become God. Man can define his own reality. Man can create right and wrong. Man can do this and do that, because man is a god in his own sense. And really, there is a natural order to the world. And I increasingly see this. And I said, okay, I expect the second part of that revelation thing. The other profound thought I had is that in the countryside, everything glorifies God. Everything out here is natural, and there's just this pointing to the natural order. And what I realize is that in the cities where most people live, and the suburbs as well, everything is artificial, and everything points to this order of man, the man God. And in the countryside, there's at least really is employment to a higher power. And not to brag too much, because once again, there's plenty of faithful Christians and things in the cities and the suburbs, and there's plenty of terrible Christians and non-Christians in the countryside. But I point that out just to say that there is just a natural order to creation, and I really do think so much of the problem, really the great crisis of the world today, is the rejection of the natural order. People don't acknowledge the natural order. There's a natural order to creation, a natural law. God has created everything with specific purposes and specific uses, and when we abuse the uses and purposes of things, we're going against the natural order. And I really see this as it's just really it just really changes the way you view the world when you realize that everything has a purpose and a function, and that the world has been created. Really, the world in its own way is alive. Everything is interconnected, and it's just the world is very much alive, and because God has made it so, God has made it good, and man has really just rejected his part of this natural order. Man doesn't see himself as a part of creation. It seems to be he sees himself as the great creator, and I see this increasing divide in civilization today between those that are going to acknowledge the natural order and that man has restraints and that man has to respect the natural law, and between those that say that man is able to do whatever he wants. And I think increasingly in the Western world, we will see an increasing divide between Christians and non Christians, because what I've noticed is that most people that acknowledge there's a natural order to things are sooner or later becoming Christians. A lot of though most people in the West, a lot of people are leaving Christianity. More people are leaving Christianity than are becoming Christian. It's worth noting that a lot of people are becoming Christian, like a lot of people with real brain power and very intellectual people, and people that really acknowledge the natural orders of the world. And a lot of people are becoming Christian and acknowledging a natural order. And I think in Western society that we live in today, the great war we are already seeing today and will only increase is between those that believe that Western civilization should remain Christian and that our morality should be rooted in Christianity, and that we must remain a Christian civilization built on Christian morality and must continue with a Christian society. And those that say no more, really the great divide is between the Christian and the humanist. Those that say that man has become a god and that man is to be worshipped and that he can do anything he wants and that we are to create this utopia. And there's just great rejection of the natural order of things. I think the clearest example of it is with the depopulation crisis. I've talked about this before on the channel, but essentially, for those of you who don't know, in every developed nation, every developing nation, every nation that is embracing the Industrial Revolution, a consequence is that they have a negative fertility rate, meaning that more people are dying than are being born. And in wealthy nations, we've made up for this for decades with immigration. But the thing is, in now the countries where we get our immigrants from, their populations are beginning to experience the same thing. And for those who have not been called celibacy, the only other option is marriage. And most married people end up having children. That's the primary function of marriage, is raising the family. And it really is a beautiful thing, marriage and children, because man man is participating in creation with God when he brings life into this world in the institution of marriage. And it's really a beautiful thing. And to see this, and of course, what was one of the first things God ever said to man? Be fruitful and multiply. And this fundamental commandment is now being massively rebelled against. Just a lot of people are becoming anti-natalist, meaning they don't want to bring life into this world. A lot of people increasingly think that it's even wrong to have children. And of course, we see it with abortion, I think, most clearly. The belief that, we are God and that we can take life if we want to. And it's just, there's this massive rebellion against the natural order and the sacredness of children. Not to say that it'd be worship, but children are loved by God. Jesus says, come all to little children unto me, and you must be like a little child to enter the kingdom of heaven. Children are incredibly important to God, and He loves them a great deal. And the continuation of continuing to have children is very important, and continuing to be fruitful and multiply. And really, this great divide we're seeing today is the people that are remaining Christian are still having a lot of children. This is this great divide. I forget the site now, but what they what different studies have shown is that people that attend church every week have a positive fertility rate, meaning like above 2.1, which is the amount of children you need to have on average to increase the population. And those that are semi-religious attenders have like 1.8, which is negative but relatively high. But what they found with the graph is that non-religious people, their fertility rate is not only lower than that, it's actually plummeting right now. And what we're seeing is those that rebel against the natural order, by and large, and of course there are some agnostic people and atheist people that do have children, of course, but by and large they tend to have much less children or no children at all. And there's this mass rebellion against the natural order of things, and I think that's the clearest example. And I had this profound realization a while back. If we take it from a purely secular Darwinistic perspective, which is, of course, secular Darwinism, I'll give my own opinions on evolution another day. But take it from a purely secular Darwinistic perspective, your purpose in life is reproduction. Now, of course, I don't fully agree with that. I do think, of course, reproduction is very important, but that's not your only purpose in life. But Darwinistically speaking, your purpose in life is to pass on your genes. And what I realize is that if anything gets in the way of the passing on of genes, it's an evolutionary dead end. And what I realize is that modern advanced industrial civilization, the one that we live in today, is evolutionarily speaking a dead end, because what's happening is that it's encouraging a negative fertility rate, very low fertility. And that means that it's an evolutionary dead end. And the only people that are not rebelling, the only people that are still having children in large numbers are people that in some way acknowledge a natural order to the thing. Not just Christians, also conservative Jews and Muslims as well. But it's those who acknowledge a natural order to the world are still having children and still bringing life into this world. And I've just really come to see there is just this natural order to creation, and it's really somewhat changed how I view life in general. Like a while back, it being spring, we have a big holly tree in our yard, and every spring, because the flowers on it bloom, a bunch of bees, like I'm talking a bunch of bees, like a bunch of bees, get on that tree. And a younger me would have been terrified of bees and all that, but all I could do is just stand there, and of course not get directly in there. I'm not a fool, but all I could do is just stand there, and I just admired it and said, "Wow!" I mean, it's just the beauty of God's creation, what God has made in the natural order of things. And for instance, I'm like a spider. Like I would in my younger days, I would have like squished a spider. But now, like often when I see spiders and stuff, I'm like, what beauty! What you can see the Creator's hand at work, and with a lot of bugs and with plants and with things. I see the Creator's hand at work, and I really acknowledge the natural beauty and the natural order to the world, and I see that man is a part of creation. That he is not separate from creation; he is a part of it, and that he has a role to play in helping the planet. That's a part of our duty that God gave us authority over the planet, and a part of our duty in serving God is to help the planet, help steward creation, and to be a part of it. And what I'm really realizing today is that we're in mass rebellion of this kind of thing. And it's just you look at the society today in just about every way. Um, I don't even think I really need to get too deep into a lot of examples, because I think if you just live in the world today, it's quite obvious. Just, I mean, take this whole, like, what I've said, that there's a natural order to creation, and that when man rebels against the natural order, he's essentially poisoning himself because he is meant to be in the natural order. And I mean, just look at just about everything in the world today, and there's just mass rebellion. I look at like the food we eat, especially here in America, but just in the Western world in general. I mean, the food we eat is so processed and so unhealthy. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I, of course, eat unhealthy food as well. But I mean, the diet we eat is incredibly unhealthy for us. And I mean, that I do believe the body and the soul are connected. And I believe if you're doing things that are bad for your body, it's somewhat bad for your soul as well. I'm reminded of what was it? John Wesley said, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." We don't live in a very clean society today. And I think the world we live in today is so unhealthy and it's so unnatural. And man is a part of creation. I'm mostly going off my memory here, but they've done studies in the past, studying zoo animals in captivity, and what they have found is that animals in captivity and stuff, they get very stressed out. Um, they start having a bunch of problems, and like if you look at animals in a zoo, and you look at people today in modern society, there's a lot of parallels, and I think that's because we've removed ourselves from a natural order of things. Like if you look at our ancestors, we first started out in a more a tribal society, living in small groups, foraging the land, and then we moved into agriculture. And agriculture is still very much attached to nature as well, because when you're living the agricultural lifestyle, you're attached to the seasons. You live by the seasons, you live by the weather. You're very much attached to the natural world of things. And for most of human history, it's been 90% of the population farms, and cities were much smaller and much different than they are today. And just the world was very different in the past. Not to say the past was perfect. Like for instance, infant mortality was incredibly high in the past. So I do like that about the modern world. Infant mortality is now very low, but it's just we've really kind of left a natural order to things. And I'm not here to idealize the past, but it's just there is an order to creation, and really we are living in a new Tower of Babel because we've rebelled against the order of creation. We are convinced that we are a god, and really everything man does in the current age is really in the same spirit of Babel. We're building a great tower, and we believe ourselves to come to heaven. And I saw something like those World Economic Forum people, where a bunch of wealthy people get together and they talk about where they want to take the world. And one thing really stood out to me is one of the men, and it's going off memory here, so I couldn't give you an exact citation or whatever. One of the fellas, he when talking about new projects, talking about things of really kind of making man like a god, he mentioned intelligent design, and he said, "I'm not talking about intelligent design like some kind of far off god in heaven," and he mocked the idea. He says, "When I'm talking about intelligent design, I'm talking about man and man's ability to create things." And it really is, I mean, we're living in a society that really mocks a natural order to things. And I mean, I'm sure some people will even call me crazy for making this video because it's just there is just this order to creation, and a lot of people don't like to acknowledge there's an order to creation. And we're a part of we cannot escape the order. We cannot escape the natural law. Um, what is it? Somebody said, if you break the Ten Commandments, the Ten Commandments will break you. And I think it's very much true of the natural law as well. And of course, the Ten Commandments are part of that law. But if we break the natural law, the natural order of things, the natural order of things will break us. We cannot escape from it. And I think just in the world we're living in today, I think that people are beginning to leave this behind. I said before, I think the great fight for Western civilization we're seeing today is between the Christian heritage of the West and preserving a Christian civilization, and those that want to destroy it and really to make a humanist society, to worship man, to really give power to the state. And I really became disillusioned with politics in general when I realized that pretty much everybody's just the solution for a lot of people is just to give the state more power, give us control of the state, and the state will fix your problems. And really, so much of the political, in my generation, it's very political. Politics is said to be the new religion in many ways. And what I realized is that most people all they're trying to do is trying to build a heaven on this earth. They no longer believe in a heaven in the next life. So then now they have to build a heaven on this earth. And so much what drives contemporary secular politics, whether it be right or left, is this utopianism that we can build a heaven on this earth. Of course, with the communists, we see this attempt to have the state control society, but we even see it say on the right, the libertarian. The libertarian believes that if we could just liberate the market, that we can live in this perfect society. And neither are true. The state cannot solve our problems, nor can unlimited free market greed fix our problems. The greatest institution for reform and progress is the church. And I'm a true believer that if we want to better the world, we have to do it through the church, and the church helping society and bettering society. The church, for instance, invented science along with music notes and many other things. The modern world is created by the church, and what man in the modern world has done is that he has divorced himself from the Catholic and the Protestant heritage of the West, and all of the contributions made by Catholics and Protestants, creating modern science. And I mean, if you look at pretty much every scientist before the 20th century, they were Christian, or at least some degree of deist. They acknowledged the natural order to creation. And it's only very recent that all the smart people have been atheists. There's still plenty of smart people that are not atheists. And it's just, I think that we're seeing this great shift in the Western world today between the Christian and the non-Christian. The great war we're seeing for the future of our society is between those that say that we should remain a Christian society and that our nation should remain Christian nations, and those that say we should become humanist, whether it be free market libertarians or communists or any others that want to rebel against the natural order of things and want to make man a god. Forgive me, dust. But that's really just a great divide I see in the world today. But I do think that we will ultimately win because, of course, God's on our side. But I think that the Christian will win. I mean, look at secular communism in the 20th century. It failed miserably. No communist nation has lasted has lasted 100 years. And I think that communist China is not too much far off from where Soviet Russia was. If you really look at it, in China, they've rebelled against the natural order of things, and they have an incredibly low fertility rate. And on the good side, though, Christianity is growing like wildfire in China, and I'm very hopeful for Christianity in China. I want to see what it will do there, because I'm a believer that eventually the whole world will convert. I definitely lean post-millennialist in my theology, the belief that eventually the whole world will become Christian. And I think that may take a very long time. But I definitely lean that way, that the whole world will become Christianized and that Christ will come back and will become king of the world, and every knee will bow and all that things. But that's a story for another time. But I do believe that the great fight in our civilization we see today is between the Christian and the non-Christian. And I'm seeing a lot of people, smart people, become Christian. Forgive me. Become religious. And I'm seeing a lot of people, secular people, move in increasingly a religious direction in acknowledgement of a natural law. And I think that the humanist will become increasingly radical and extreme in their pursuit for godhood. And then they just won't have children. A big benefit to the Christian is that we continue to have children in much larger numbers. The religious as well. I talked about Muslims and Jews, but we continue to have children. An example I'm always really blown away is the Amish. The Amish are fascinating people. And what's fascinating about the Amish is their incredibly high fertility rate. And they live in, I'm not here to idealize the Amish, but I cannot deny that. No, they're very bad at evangelism. Except for they have done some evangelism. There's actually African Amish now because they've done mission trips to Africa, which is really cool. But the Amish, they've created a Christian society, very much secular from our own society. They call themselves, what is it? They call us English. I believe they call themselves German. I believe that's correct. English. Okay. I forget what they call themselves, but they call people outside of our world English, and I think they call themselves German. But they've created their own society, separate from our own, a Christian society, and they have an incredibly high fertility rate. And if things continue, which I think they will, there will be several million Amish by the turn of the century. and Amish are beginning to buy up old farms and stuff. I think the Amish will become a major player in the world in the future, but we're just seeing that those that continue to follow a natural order to things are increasingly separating off from our mainstream society, which is becoming increasingly humanist, and they're building a Christian society. I think I look at homeschooling. All the whole homeschooling movement is really kind of a reversion back to the old days. We're going back to the one-room schoolhouse, to more self-education, and I think that most of the homeschool movement is a Christian thing. Christians are cutting themselves off from mainstream education as it becomes increasingly humanistic, and they're going to increasingly start building a system of private schools and homeschools and things of this nature. And they're going to start building, Christian institutions. And I think that what we're seeing is Christians are going to outlast the humanists. And I think that modern civilization is not going to last too much longer. And it's just, I think that we're also just going to see an increasingly a demonic influence in the world. We're seeing a great deal of spiritual warfare. So much of what I've talked about, there's a demonic influence behind it. Um, and I see a lot of things that we're doing, awful. Like I do believe in climate change to some extent. I do believe that man has some effect. Um, I do think that probably some of the proportions are overblown because everybody's got a motive. Scientists, if they report the worst possible things, are going to get more funding, and politicians, if they peddle the worst possible case scenarios, are going to get more votes. But I do think that it is real to some extent, and I do think that man is in some way callous in it. And one thing I've been studying a lot of demonology and things, particularly from exorcists. I highly recommend Father Chad Rupert, a Roman Catholic, a genius man. I highly recommend you listen to his talks. They're very he's very wise, so much wisdom. And even though I'm a Christian Universalist and he's a very conservative Roman Catholic, I still think there's a lot of value. Sensus Fidelium, conservative Roman Catholic ministry, actually positioned here in North Carolina. It's one of my favorite channels. They have a lot of rich resources about things. Bit of a tangent there, but what he pointed out is like there's spirits of the air, and I think that's part of it too. With the planet we're living in today, as man is becoming increasingly sinful, he's inviting in demonic forces, spirits of the air to affect the weather. Of course, I do think humans have an actual side to this too, and demons and things to affect our society. All the lust and the promiscuity of the modern age. We're inviting in spirits. We're inviting in demons. And I used to, be a bit more, secular in my view of psychology and things. And I do think there is still, I think that modern psychology is correct on the physical, the flesh side, because the enemy of the Christian is the world, the flesh, and the devil. And I think they're very much correct on the flesh side of psychology. But there's very much a spiritual side of psychology and a demonic warfare side of psychology that I think is being underestimated. And I think another example of people replacing God and really kind of embracing man as God now is the cult of drugs. My mom's an ER. I sound like an Australian or something. My mom's an ER nurse, and she works with people who are on drug overdoses all the time. And she can tell you a thing or two about drugs and their negative effect. I'm not just talking about stuff, various recreational drugs. I'm also talking about medical drugs, the massive addiction to various medications, anti-anxieties, antidepressants, this mass addiction, and a lot of people, as they've rebelled against the natural order, and they live in this incredibly unnatural and unhealthy lifestyle we live in today. They're just getting pumped full of drugs, and this isn't healthy for us. It's very bad for us, actually. And I think it's just another example of this man of humanism and men worshiping themselves. And we're really just seeing it now. This mass self-worship and this real egoism in our modern age. It's an age of so much ego. I really have realized the devil is the father of lies and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And I'm really realizing the value of objective truth and the importance of truth. And in the world we live in today, there is no objective truth. And I think the ultimate sign of ego, sign of pride, sign of the demonic is to say that there is no truth and that man can create his own truth. And I think this is the ultimate sign of this ego we live in the modern age. And I'm reminded of, Genesis. The devil says, yea, that, what is it? When you eat of the fruit, you will know good and evil. and you will become like God. We will become gods. And the old lie of the serpent was that man shall become God. And if people aren't becoming secular atheists, they're becoming New Agers. And so much of the New Age is this belief that man will become God. And no, okay, I know I'm sounding like a nut with this video. This is one of my videos where I just go really into it. But so much of the New Age movement um, is fundamentally demonic. It's all about communicating with spirits. I typically call it spiritualism, but it's all about communicating with spirits, and these things are demonic forces. Um, and really, Fulton J. Sheen, he's this great evangelist. He's one of the greatest evangelists in American history, right up there with like Billy Graham, Billy Sunday. He's a great Catholic evangelist, Catholic bishop, amazing evangelist in the 20th century. And a bit of an inspiration for this video was a sermon called Antichrist. He gave it back in 1947. And I highly recommend you go watch the sermon after the video. I don't fully agree with Sheen's views of eschatology. Um, I do think that he was very much dead on. I think about a lot of the world we live in today. The whole like the God, man, God, God, man thing. I got that from his sermon. Um, but he really did kind of predict a lot of the spiritualism we're living in today, I think, in that sermon, at least somewhat. Um, and I think really spiritualism and this worshiping of spirits is where our society is heading. People are going to start worshiping spirits. And I see a lot of demonic things in the society we live in today. But I am optimistic. I do think that Christ will conquer. I say it all the time on the channel. And a verse that's really becoming very influential for me. And my own thought is Revelation 17:14. The whole Christ will conquer verse. And to paraphrase it a bit, it says, they will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he's King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and those that are with them are chosen, faithful, and something like that. And that one's really sticking with me. It's that in the current time we're living in, demonic forces and man's own pride and his own ego are waging war against God and the natural order of things, the natural order of the world. And but Christ will conquer. And I think that after this age of humanism subsides, I think that we will see a massive. I'm convinced that we are in the beginnings of a revival. I think that people are getting tired of this age of humanism, this age of self worship, and people are beginning to come back to Christ. And I think that we will see some sort of religious revival. I know it may sound insane now, but I do think that somehow, some way, we will see a revival of Christianity. And I think that we will see a revival of Western civilization, a revival of Christendom. I'm very excited to see that. But I do think that Christ will conquer. And I think that this current age of evil that we live in the current time, that there will be a return to a natural order and a natural law. And in my opinion, I think that modern civilization as we know it today will not exist in 200 years. I've, of course, been greatly influenced by the work of Howard Storm, and particularly on Howard Storm's vision of the future, where he saw a society that was very much like the Garden of Eden in many ways, not perfectly like it, but a society that was very simplistic, a society where people lived in very simplistic rural communities. And that view really stuck with me. And of course, they have they're much more in tune, they're much more at peace than we are today. And that view has very much affected me in many ways. And I just think that the world we're moving towards, past this current age of ego and pride and man becoming like a god, is towards a life of simplicity. I think that we will return more to a more natural living. I think that people of tomorrow, they will be much more religious than we are today. I think they will own many less possessions. I think the massive cult of possessions, the massive cult of consumerism we live in today, is awful for our souls and it's awful for the planet. And I think that people in the future will own many less things, and I think they'll live much more in nature. There will be many more plants. I can't give you the specifics, the basics, but what I think is going to happen with the world we're seeing today, this new Tower of Babel, is that God will preserve a faithful remnant. Most of our society will become unhinged and very egotistical and worshiping the self. But there will be a remnant who remain loyal to Christ, and along with other people who at least acknowledge the natural order of things, like Jews and Jews, Muslims, not atheists, and other religious groups that still acknowledge a natural order to the world, and they will also survive. But I think particularly Christians will survive. People who acknowledge the natural order to the world. and I think that they will inherit the world after simply most of the humanists die off. As I said, they reject the natural order, so they don't tend to have children. And I think that after that, our society will see radical changes. I couldn't tell you exactly what will happen, but I think that we will see a massive return to a more natural diet. I was, it wasn't that long ago that people still grew most of their own food. I listen to older people. Particularly my grandfather tells me about growing up. And of course, this is the rural, poor South. He also grew up without indoor plumbing. But he tells me about back when he grew up. His family, they had a big garden, and most of the food they would like salad every night. They would just pick from their local garden. They know their garden in their backyard, and they'd feed their whole family. And they had like 5 kids, uh, and that fed them for the most part. And of course, they did buy food too. But back then, most of the food was made locally. He talks about a lot of he'd go down to, and back then in the countryside, unlike today, there are a bunch of small little stores, and a lot of that food we made locally with local ingredients, and it just really amazes me how much the world has changed. But he says, tells me about people grew their own food and they had a garden and they'd feed most of themselves. In fact, he tells me that they had to have 2 hogs every year, and they'd kill the hogs and they eat them. And that's just a life that's so alien to me today. And that's not just my grandpa's side of the family. My aunt on the other side of the family, mom's side of the family, tells me about her grandfather who was born in 1912, and going up to visit him in the mountains. And she said something very similar. They'd eat out of the garden every night, and she told me about her grandpa. And the only time, for instance, he would he'd buy Coca-Cola, Coke bottles, the old kind, and a crate of them. He'd put them like down in the cellar, and he'd only drink Coca-Cola on special occasion. And not to idealize the past, I keep in mind my ancestors, they had a much harder life than I do. I'm most certainly glad I'm not a coal miner in West Virginia. Um, but I mean, they did live a more natural life. It was not that long ago that people were growing their own food regularly, canning it, eating it. That people lived a much more just natural life in tune with the land. Not to idealize, once again, that was a hard life, but they were much more in tune with nature, in tune with the natural world. And I think that we will see a reversion to that. I do think that the big cities, the cities are the areas with the lowest fertility rate, and as the fertility rate crashes, I think cities will massively change. I think that we'll see gardens in the cities. I couldn't tell you the specifics, but I do think that a lot of things will be abandoned, and people will start growing food in them. And I think the suburbs will somewhat fade away. What will happen is some of the houses will still be lived in, and other houses will start falling in, and they'll start growing gardens and things in there. And I think that we'll slowly start seeing the hands of time turn back. From my own personal experience, I know this is purely anecdotal. I've noticed that with COVID and like supply chain shortages and stuff, that a lot of people, my family included, have begun to, instead of buying eggs from the store, have begun to go back to what people used to do, raise their own chickens. And of course, that's been common around here for a long time, but I've noticed it's gotten much more popular to raise your own chickens, or instead of buying your eggs from the store, buy your eggs from your neighbor down the street. And I think that something like that's going to become increasingly normal. And I think also this will happen because of remote online working. People, instead of living in the big cities to get a job, can get a really good job living in rural areas. And I think that America will begin to ruralize. And I think that my honest opinion on the future of society, America, 100 years from now, is it'll be a much more rural society. There will be many more in the cities. Will be smaller and cleaner. I think they'll be cleaner, and I think that society 100 years from now will be also much more religious. And I think society will be a very different place. I also think there'll be a lot more regulation on technology. Um, I'm the oldest of several siblings, and you can tell with kids these days. I can tell you as a young person, you can tell if somebody's born from about 2010 on, because that's when the iPad comes out. And I'm amazed it's taken this long for people to catch on to iPad kids being a thing. Kids that are essentially raised by the iPad. And I can tell you that kids that spend all their time on iPads and stuff like that, it really messes up their brain. All sorts of crazy stuff happens. And I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more, because these technologies are very new. And I'm not sure if we'll completely abandon the internet. I don't think we will. But I do think that there'll be a lot more regulation. I think that life will become much simpler. As I said before, the modern civilization we live in today is an evolutionary dead end because it always drives down fertility rates to the point of being negative. So we're going to live in a more traditional society in many ways. And I think the world 100 years from now is going to be very, very different. And it very much reminds me of the Tower of Babel, how man built a great city in his pride and arrogance to God, and God scattered the language, and man had to spread out, and the great city of Babel sat there and rot away. And I think in a similar way, we're going to see all these great things that man has built in his own pride and his own arrogance and his own, just ego, and this world we're living today of pride and ego and arrogance. And I think we're going to see all that slowly fade away. And I think, man, the clock of time, the hands of time will slowly move backwards. I think that life will look a lot more like it used to. I think that a lot more production of things will be done locally. I think people will be much more religious, simply because the religious will outbreed them, the non-religious, and a lot of non-religious people are becoming religious. I think that a nation our great grandchildren will be a very different nation than the one we live in today. I know I have strange opinions on things. That was a very strange video, but I hope you enjoyed it. God bless. I don't know. It's just I'm so tired of the pride and the ego of the modern age. Really, what I get sick of. And I think our pride and our ego, we're convinced that we're better than everybody who ever came before us. Um, and we're just so convinced of our own self-righteousness. And in the modern age, it feels like man is convinced that he is a god and that he can do anything, and that he can just rebel against the natural orders of things. And I think that this is just dead wrong, and I think that this will kill our society. Well, that's my opinion. Feel free to disagree with me if you want. But I do think that civilization 100 years hence, 200 years hence, is going to be incredibly different from the world we live in today. And I don't think it will be this hyper advanced tech civilization, because if our civilization is collapsing now under this level of technology, do you really think that it could take like the world of like Star Trek level of technology? I don't think it really could, and I think that the world's going to move backwards, not forwards, at least when it comes to tech. Of course, I have strange views of a lot of things, and I'm willing to be open to admit that I'm wrong about some of this. But well, y'all have a good day. God bless. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and Christ will conquer.